I used to believe silence was the only thing holding my family together. When my father jeered that I'd never amount to anything, I smiled and let the words sink without a ripple. Every holiday, my sister took the chair of honor while I hovered at the margins, unseen but useful. I remembered birthdays, repaired whatever broke, kept the peace, never asked for thanks. For years, I told myself it was enough. That invisibility was a kind of safety, that being quiet was nobler than being misunderstood. Then came the night my mother laughed with them, joined in as if I weren't standing 3 feet away. She pretended not to see me at all. Something shifted then. It wasn't rage that rose first. It was clarity. I realized I'd confused endurance with acceptance, silence with grace, so I stopped trying to belong. Some truths don't need to be shouted to crack a world open. They only have to be spoken once. The road to Clearwater Bay curved along the Gulf, where the air always smelled of salt and something heavier, memory. The palms leaned toward the wind as if acknowledging all the years I'd stayed away. 25 years. Long enough to build a life far from this coastline, long enough to forget the cadence of this place, until it all came rushing back the moment I crossed the bridge. The resort rose from the night like a mirage, white columns, glass doors spilling gold light, the faint scent of perfume and polished stone drifting into the lot. Seaside horizon. I'd seen the name on the reunion invitation and almost torn it in half. Instead, I sat idling in the parking lot, hand locked around the wheel, staring at the building that had once belonged to my classmates' families, the sort of place I could never afford growing up. Inside, laughter hit me before the air conditioning did. Chandeliers glittered over a glossy lobby, a jazz trio played near the bar, and a banner stretched across the ballroom doors. Lakeview Academy, 25 years later, the same school that had taught us to measure success in titles and surfaces. Some lessons linger. The first thing I noticed was how loudly everyone spoke. The louder the voice, the more expensive the clothes, it seemed. Tight circles had formed, bankers, attorneys, surgeons, each group talking over itself, striving to shine a little brighter than the person beside them. I slipped past them largely unseen until a familiar perfume ghosted across my shoulder. Adeline Porter, that voice. I turned. Clara Maynard, Lakeview's golden girl turned senator, smiled at me with the practiced warmth of a campaign photo. Her hair was immaculate, pearls glowing soft under the lights. "Well," she said, hugging me with arms that never quite touched, "you haven't changed a bit, still so practical." Laughter rippled through the circle behind her. It was the same sound I remembered from senior year, sweet on the surface, edged underneath. I smiled back. Some battles aren't worth fighting on public ground. "Some of us still like simplicity," I said. Her smile tightened for a heartbeat before she pivoted to face the group. "Everyone, this is Adeline Porter." We were at Lakeview together. She tapped her chest lightly. Senator Clara Maynard, Florida. Every word from her sounded tuned for applause. A few polite nods in my direction, a few murmured greetings, then their attention drifted elsewhere. No one asked where I'd been. No one asked what I did. I was the quiet one again, the misfit in a room devoted to its own story of success. At the main table, James Carter held court, surrounded by an eager audience. He was telling a story about his latest project, voice rich with the same easy arrogance he'd had as a teenager. His gaze swept the room, paused on me, and recognition flared into a smirk. "Adeline Porter," he called out, loud enough to command the room. "She once swore she'd change the world. Guess the world's still waiting." Laughter broke out again. Even Clara lifted her hand decorously to her mouth, as if it were the cleverest thing she'd heard all night. I raised my glass to him and smiled. If I've learned anything, it's that silence unsettles some people more than outrage ever could. I found a small table near the back, one of those half-forgotten islands reserved for the unremarkable. Music swelled, glassware chimed, old stories collided and overlapped. I watched the faces I'd once known, bathed in chandelier light. They hadn't changed much, still proud, still so sure that success lived in the number of people watching. My own reflection glanced back at me from the curve of my glass, older, steadier, harder to read. I wasn't the girl they remembered, not even close. The wine tasted metallic, too sweet to feel honest. My purse buzzed once, a precise, controlled vibration. Something in me froze even before my hand closed around the device. My fingers found the familiar weight. The small screen blinked once green, then amber. Sky Vault Command, Priority 1, 17 years since I'd seen those words. I set the glass down carefully as if any sound might draw attention. Around me, laughter blurred into a single indistinct hum. my pulse synced with the faint tremor of the chandeliers. After all this time, after years of passing for ordinary, my old world was reaching back for me. I closed my eyes. For a single heartbeat, I wasn't in that ballroom. I was somewhere dust choked the sky and silence meant survival. When I opened them, the room remained, Clara laughing too loudly, James performing for his crowd, no one aware that I'd gone perfectly still. I slid the device back into my purse and exhaled. This wasn't a coincidence. The past rarely is. It finds you when you've convinced yourself it never will. I stood, smoothed my navy dress, and walked to the terrace. The gulf stretched out beyond the rail, dark and endless, swallowing the last of the light. The wind had shifted. I didn't know it yet, but so had everything else. Inside, the ballroom lights dimmed to a warm gold as the MC's voice boomed over the sound system, announcing the evening's highlight. Clara stepped onto the low stage, sapphire dress catching the light like authority itself. The applause was instant and practiced, the sound of people congratulating themselves for knowing someone important. Her voice cut clean through the noise, bright, polished, effortless. She began with nostalgia, the kind engineered to make people lean in, to forget how little they'd cared about each other for 25 years. She talked about our senior year, about the yearbook line where we'd written that one day we'd serve our country. Then she smiled, a woman untouched by failure. She said she had kept that promise. She de-stayed, fought for her community, lived her principles, and was proud to still be fighting. The applause swelled, heavy and suffocating. It pressed against my ribs. Then her gaze found mine, held for just a fraction too long. Some people, she said lightly, choose different paths. And that's what makes life interesting. A thin ripple of polite laughter slipped through the room, the kind that waits for permission. My hand tightened around my glass. I didn't move. She turned away, scanning the crowd as if she hadn't just slit the air between us with a scalpel. The music shifted, lights brightened, conversations resumed. My mind wasn't in Clearwater Bay anymore. It was 2004, Pentagon Conference Room, the day I learned my nomination for the Legion of Merit had been quietly withdrawn. I tried not to remember the details, the stale coffee, the hum of fluorescent bulbs, the officer who couldn't meet my eyes. "It's not a mistake, ma'am," he'd said. Someone higher up pulled it. Weeks later, a young lieutenant I'd mentored slipped me a coded message, a copy of the withdrawal email, advisory board directive, signed personally by Clara Maynard. Her name beside the order that erased my team's recognition. I stared at that document for hours. The same signature that had once shared every student council memo and debate brief with mine had wiped away what should have been an acknowledgement of sacrifice, and never said a word. I told myself it didn't matter, that medals were metal and integrity was quieter. I tried to believe that forgetting was strength. But listening to her now, flawless and applauded, I realized memory doesn't fade while injustice is still breathing. It waits. She ended her speech with practiced humility, promising to continue serving Florida. More applause, more flashes. When she stepped off the stage, the crowd pressed toward her like supplicants. Eventually, she drifted to my table. "Adeline," she said softly, voice dipped in honey, "you were so quiet during my speech." "You always were, weren't you?" She reached for the bottle and topped off my glass without asking. Her bracelet clicked against the rim, a tiny metallic sound that slid up my spine. "I hear you're doing consulting now," she went on. "Security, was it? Sounds exciting. I hope it isn't too dangerous." Her eyes searched my face, not with curiosity but calculation. A gentleness sharpened to a blade. I let my mouth curve slightly. "Danger," I said, "is usually just part of the job." The corner of her lips twitched into that hard, reflective smile I remembered from high school debates, right before she twisted someone's words in front of a crowd. She lifted her glass. "Well, some of us were always made for quieter kinds of service, weren't we?" It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I let the silence settle between us, heavy and unmoving. The band played, champagne flowed, silverware clinked, all of it blurred into background. What I heard instead was memory grinding itself sharp. A minute later, she excused herself, drawn back toward the lights and cameras. The crowd parted around her like water. They saw a senator, a leader, a woman of purpose. I saw the girl who had once copied my speeches, who'd whispered that she'd be remembered no matter what it cost. She hadn't changed. Same ambition, same hunger to stand higher, even if it meant stepping on someone else. I turned my glass slowly between my fingers, chandelier light breaking across its surface. For years I'd mistaken forgetting for peace, forgiveness for wisdom, but peace built on silence rots from within. I set the glass down, my pulse steadied. Across the room, Clara laughed again, hand to her chest as though the world itself had just complimented her. She had taken something from me once that couldn't be returned. But time has its own way of restoring balance. When her eyes met mine, her smile stayed smooth, but behind it lay something sharp, aware. She knew I remembered. She just didn't know what I intended to do with it. The music rose, crowding out everything else. I lifted my glass, merely pretending to drink, feeling an old truth return with the clean edge of a blade. Some debts don't fade with time. They wait for the moment silence finally breaks. The noise inside swelled to a larger, more chaotic pitch. Brass, laughter, the frantic hum of people avoiding their own thoughts. I slipped through the open doors onto the terrace, grateful for the cold. The sea lay black and glossy, swallowing moonlight in fractured silver lines. I stood still, letting the salt wind sting my eyes. Then came the voice I'd hoped to avoid, James. He stepped out beside me, tie loosened, that half-smile hanging on like habit. He cradled his drink as if it were both shield and prop. He couldn't stand silence unless it belonged to him. Some things never change. He stopped shoulder to shoulder, close enough that his bourbon cut through the salt. So, he said, you're still working for the government. I heard you're teaching tactics to the reserves now or something. I watched the horizon. Where the dark sky met the darker line of water, my reflection flickered faintly in the glass door caught between worlds. I still work, I said. People usually don't know at what, he chuckled. Not unkindly, but sharp at the edges. That's your problem, Adeline, always hiding, always secretive. Life doesn't have to be a mission. He meant it as a joke. The words landed heavier than he realized. For some of us, life had never stopped being a mission, especially for those who never got to finish theirs. I didn't answer. I let the wind fill the space instead. Eventually he went back inside. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly, the way I used to after long deployments, measured, waiting for my pulse to remember normal. The terrace fell quiet again. Waves broke softly against stone below, and somewhere offshore a buoy light flickered red. The air tasted of salt and faint rust, and then the past slid over the present like a second skin. Afghanistan 2011, Operation Artemis Rift. Flashes, not pictures, a desert sky smothered in stars, static in my headset, sand and oil and gunpowder thick on the air. 3 soldiers gone in minutes because someone had leaked our coordinates. The last transmission still lived in the back of my mind, cut by interference. We've been exposed. Someone sold us out. They never came home. The Pentagon's review called it a systems failure. That was the language on the report, failure. But it wasn't the system that failed, it was trust. That night I swore no politics would ever touch their names. No one would distort what they'd died for. If it meant living off stage, so be it. Cold crept into my hands. I set my empty glass on the rail and watched the water beat along its rim. Inside, laughter swelled again, a whole room praising itself for being noticed. My phone buzzed once, then again longer. The third vibration didn't stop. I drew it from my clutch, shielding the screen from the wind. A single encrypted line blinked, shifting from green to red. The text unfolded, brisk and exact. Aurora Defense Net breach detected. Potential insider link. Maynard C. For a moment I thought it was a glitch. My brain simply refused the pattern. Then I read it again. Maynard C. Clara, still smiling under crystal lights, talking about service and loyalty. Her name sitting inside a classified network breach. My breath caught, then slowed into a deep, familiar calm. Instinct stepped forward, emotion stepped aside. Sky Vault alerts did not misfire. Level 1 was reserved for priority threats, national scale. 17 years since the last time my clearance had carried that designation. I clenched the phone until its edges bit my palm. The recall ping in the ballroom earlier hadn't been random. It was an activation order. They depulled me out of civilian quiet because the threat was inside, because of her. I looked back through the glass. Clara stood beneath the chandelier, radiant and encircled, laughter rising above the rest like a chorus she'd rehearsed. All those people, drunk on nostalgia and ego, had no idea what was unraveling in their midst. The years between then and now pressed down on my chest, every promise, every ghost. The mission I thought I'd left had found me again. This time it had a name. My phone vibrated once more. Confirmation of reactivation. Level 1 authority. Sky Vault, active. I slipped the device back into my clutch. My pulse was steady now. The choice had already been made. This wasn't about redemption, it was about responsibility. About a vow I'd made in a foreign desert under the cover of radio static and loss. I stepped back into the ballroom. Light and noise slammed into me. Clara saw me and raised her glass with effortless composure. I smiled back, the music swelled, the past and present locked eyes. This time I wasn't walking away. The room had softened while I'd been gone. The band had shifted to something nostalgic, strings and brass from another age. People stood closer, basking in shared warmth as if standing beside success might let them borrow it. I lingered at the room's edge, watching. Clara, as always, occupied the center. The crowd opened around her without effort. She was mid-speech about her re-election, voice rising and falling on well-practiced beats. Words polished smooth, meaning almost absent. She said she'd never stop serving the people. She said service was her calling. I remembered another stage in the same town decades earlier. Graduation 1999, the sun scorching our gowns. Salt in the air, her at the podium for most likely to succeed, me for the West Point scholarship. I remembered her turning toward me, that tight smile, and whispering that one day people would remember her name more than mine. Looking at her now, basking under ballroom light, she'd been right. I moved toward the bar, needing something that wasn't lacquered with nostalgia. The bartender was busy, so I took a glass of water from a passing tray. The waiter hesitated, glancing at the seating chart pinned to his cuff. "Sorry, ma'am, are you a guest of someone? I don't see your name on the VIP list." He was young. Eager to keep the world in neat boxes. "I'm here on an old invitation," I said. "Maybe they just forgot me." Color rose in his cheeks. He mumbled an apology and hurried off. The water was lukewarm, but it cleared my head. Half in shadow, I watched the room dissolve to a low hum. James walked toward me, hands in his pockets like he was carrying something unsayable. He stopped a few steps away. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the joke earlier. He winced, didn't realize how it might sound. "It's fine," I said. "People can only hurt what you still care about." He studied me, as though trying to place a version of me he hadn't known existed. "You're not going to tell anyone what you actually do, are you?" he asked quietly. "You've done things, big things." Our eyes met. "Not everything needs to be said," I told him. "Some things lose their truth the moment they're spoken." He gave a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. "Still the same, huh? A riddle wrapped in a secret." "Maybe," I said. "But not for the same reasons." Someone called his name. He gave a small wave and disappeared back into the crowd. The moment he left, something in the air changed, like pressure dropping before a storm. Beyond the windows, the sea lay smooth and black. Far out, clouds bunched low and layered, their underbellies lit by faint, silent flashes. Lightning stitched the horizon, far enough to be soundless, close enough to make my heartbeat change tempo. My phone buzzed against the table. Once, twice I waited. When I finally looked, the screen glowed with a protocol I hadn't seen in years. Authorization, Aurora Incident Level 1. ETA extraction, 8 minutes, 8 minutes. The room's noise receded as though I'd stepped behind glass. Old training flooded back on its own, breath slowing, focus narrowing. Extraction meant a team was already in motion. Level 1 meant a breach with national implications. Outside, the storm clouds edged nearer, or maybe it was only my awareness tightening around them. The irony wasn't lost on me. A room full of people fixated on being seen, while the world I served in depended entirely on remaining invisible. Clara's voice floated above the din again, bright and certain, telling a story about a bill she'd passed, a story about fighting for what mattered, about integrity. Every syllable sounded like a dare. I set my glass down, my heart already knew what came next. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the shore, the chandeliers flickered, a few heads tilted up. I put my phone away and straightened my dress. I was being called in. Whatever storm was coming wasn't just in the sky. I started toward the doors. Across the room, James looked up as if he could feel the current. Our eyes locked for a fraction too long, long enough for him to know I wasn't simply leaving early. Music rose, drowning the low roar of the sea. My heels clicked down the marble corridor, steady, unhurried. Somewhere outside, a low mechanical hum began to build, barely audible, almost indistinguishable from wind. I knew better. The countdown had begun. Inside, the air changed before anyone quite registered it, not in temperature but in pressure, something unseen pressing in. Curtains at the main doors shivered. A gust pushed through the cracks, cold enough to slice through perfume and warmth. The chandeliers swayed just perceptibly. Someone laughed too loudly, trying to drown the unease. Clara took the mic again, voice lilting and bright. She announced it was time for the class photo, her charm turned up to full, then she lifted her glass. "Let's toast," she said, "to those who kept their promise to serve, even if only in memory." The laughter that followed was brittle. I put my drink down. The condensation ring it left on the linen was perfectly round, perfectly still. I stood, smoothing my skirt. The air grew denser, as if the building were holding its breath. Another gust slammed the doors. Curtains flew inward like startled birds. A low murmur rippled across the room. Glasses rattled. And then the sound came, faint at first, a deep mechanical pulse like something alive beneath the ground. Instinct recognized it before minds did. Someone near the window frowned. Another stepped toward the terrace. A shout, a helicopter, music cut off mid-bar, chairs scraped. People surged toward the terrace doors as the noise swelled, closer, louder, like a second heartbeat. Rotor wash swept across the lawn, flinging napkins, leaves, sand. Chandeliers trembled overhead. A tablecloth tore free and went flying. Someone screamed as a champagne flute shattered at her feet. Outside, a searchlight carved through the night, washing sequins, tuxedos, shocked faces in harsh white. I already knew who they were here for. The side door of the helicopter slid open. Rotors battered the air, thunder bowing to their rhythm. A figure stepped out, a dark flight suit, insignia catching the floodlight. Even at a distance, I recognized the calm, deliberate gait. Colonel Marcus Hale. He moved through the chaos as if he owned the wind. At the edge of the crowd, he touched his headset. His voice boomed over a portable speaker, clear and formal. Lieutenant General Adeline Porter, ma'am, the Pentagon requests your immediate presence. The words sliced the air. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Every face pivoted toward me. For a suspended moment, time fractured. The years I'd spent pretending to be ordinary shattered alongside the laughter and lights. Rotor wind caught the hem of my dress, tugging it sideways. The searchlight swung, pinning me in its beam. Clara stood at the front, champagne glass trembling, her voice cracked. Adeline, what are you? I met her gaze. You can call me whatever you like, I said, voice level, the same tone I'd used delivering orders while the world burned. Out there, they call me teammate. Marcus strode toward me, forced against the gusts, and pressed a sealed folder into my hands, Pentagon crest stamped deep. His face was unreadable, but urgency threaded his voice. Aurora breach confirmed, data link traced to a member of the Senate Defense Committee. I nodded, no surprise, only acknowledgement. Tell command I'll report in 15 minutes. He saluted and turned back toward the helicopter. Behind me, a whisper rose like a prayer. Adeline, James had pushed through the stunned crowd, standing a few steps away, pale and searching. Wait, I didn't fully turn, only glanced over my shoulder. I used to think love made people brave, I said quietly. Sometimes it just teaches them how to stay silent at the wrong moment. The words hung between us, soft but unignorable. I stepped past him onto the terrace. The wind hit hard, thick with salt and jet wash. My hair whipped across my face. At the threshold, I glanced back once. The ballroom lay in chaos, glitter, and fear. Clara stood rigid, her white dress splashed with spilled champagne that looked too much like blood under the strobing beam. Her hand shook. Her mask had finally slipped. I climbed into the helicopter, fingers wrapping the metal rail as the engine roared. Marcus slid the door shut. The cabin vibrated, filled with the sharp tang of fuel. Through the glass, the resort shrank, gold blurred into streaks, people into shapes. Clara remained at the terrace's edge, unmoving, glass shattered at her feet. As we rose, the noise below melted into a hum swallowed by wind. The city lights stretched out in fractured constellations. The machine's steady surge thudded through my boots. Forward was the only direction it understood. For the first time in years, my chest felt light, not because I was being recalled, but because the pretense was over. The lie had finally peeled away. Storm clouds thickened along the horizon, edges lit faintly from within. Somewhere inside that storm, the truth waited. I wasn't running from it anymore. The helicopter climbed, slicing into the dark. Clearwater Bay dropped beneath us, reduced to scattered lights and memory. By the time I crossed back into Florida's interior and reached the base at Tampa, the world had already decided who I was. My phone burned with notifications, messages, missed calls, unknown numbers. The moment I connected to the secure network, the feeds erupted. Someone had uploaded the footage. The helicopter, the searchlight, me at the center of it. They'd given it a name, the Silent General. Within hours, it was everywhere. News anchors replayed the clip in slow motion, dissecting my posture, my expression, the sway of my dress. Commentators called it symbolic, critics called it staged, social media called it war. At 3 a.m, I sat alone in my quarters, lit only by the screen. The hum of servers next door throbbed like a mechanical heartbeat. On one channel, she's an American hero. On another, no one's heard of her. What is she hiding? Between them, 100 versions of me created, pulled apart, repackaged by strangers eager either to believe or to destroy. By morning, I didn't have to check the news to know Clara had spoken. Her voice had a way of finding cameras. Still, I turned on CNN. Avoidance had never been my style. She occupied the center of the screen, background in measured navy blue, hair pulled back to suggest discipline, makeup understated. Adeline Porter was my classmate, she said, tone weighted with concern. I've always admired her courage. But sometimes people become so enamored with their own mythology that they lose sight of what's real. The public deserves truth, not hero worship. It wasn't the words. It was the delivery, soft, reasonable, hard to challenge without sounding unhinged. I'd seen that performance before when she wanted what she hadn't earned. I muted the sound, the image was enough. By noon, Silent Myth trended across platforms. My face in the searchlight became a meme, used to praise discipline, to mock arrogance, to fuel arguments about gender, power, patriotism. People who'd never heard my name 2 days before spoke of me as if they'd read my classified files. The truth was already being drafted into someone else's story. Marcus pushed open my office door without knocking. He set a steaming cup of black coffee beside the keyboard. His uniform looked slept-in, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "They want you silent," he said. "Pentagon's issuing a statement, no comment on personnel under classified review. So they talk," I said, "and I stay quiet. For now." His jaw flexed. "Yes," I smiled without humor. "I've been quiet for 25 years, Marcus. If I stay silent now, they'll let someone else write this history." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know what you're walking into. This isn't a battlefield you can map." I looked at the wall of screens, terrain overlays, encrypted feeds, alerts blinking in ordered colors. "It never is," I said. After he left, I turned back to the terminal. SkyVault's interface unfolded through layered authentication, clearance gates opening one by one. A new message pulsed at the top. "Aurora internal review pending." I opened it. The language was clean, clinical, possible leak originating within the Senate Defense Subcommittee. At the bottom, a signature code, C. Maynard, committee member. For a long time I didn't move. Even the hum of the equipment faded. Clara's TV appearance wasn't coincidence, it was preemptive fire. She moved first, casting herself as the voice of reason before the storm reached her. She'd known something was coming, now I knew what. The pieces slid together with bitter precision, the erased citation, her casual needling at the reunion. That too-knowing smile when she mentioned danger, as if she'd studied the outlines of my classified life. Now her name sat inside the core of a national defense breach. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted like metal. Central Command pinged again, requesting confirmation of receipt. I entered my code and locked the terminal. For years I'd believed silence protected people, that staying in the shadows kept the system stable, the truth preserved, but the system had never been safe. It relied on the illusion that truth could survive without defenders. Outside, aircraft rumbled across the runway, calm and controlled, nothing like the chaotic landing at Clearwater Bay. Even so, restlessness stirred under the sound. Clara had started a war of another kind, not of weapons, but of words. They burned slower and cut deeper. This time I wasn't leaving the ending to her. I shut off the monitor. Darkness rolled over the room, broken only by the faint glow of city lights beyond the blinds. Machines throbbed around me, the same machines that had once carried whispers of operations and code and trust. Now they carried both of our names. The world outside clamored for explanations. For the first time in years, I didn't feel compelled to explain. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs someone willing to stand inside the fire. 3 days later, I was summoned to Tampa Air Command. The briefing room was cold and metallic, fluorescent lights bleaching every face. The Aurora network map glowed on the main screen, a web of lines and pulsing nodes. General Collins sat at the head, posture rigid, voice trimmed to efficiency. "We can't let this touch Congress," he said. "You understand that, Porter?" "I understand," I replied. "I don't agree." His jaw tightened. Marcus stood behind me, silent, arms folded. Others shifted in their chairs, more troubled by my composure than my dissent. I tapped my console, bringing up the Aurora access log. Points of intrusion lit the map in red. One entry near the top pulsed slower than the rest. "Main 12, I said. Collins leaned forward. "What am I looking at?" "A traced internal key," I answered. "Assigned to a member of the Senate Defense Subcommittee, specifically, don't say it." His tone was quiet but absolute. "Clara Maynard," I finished. Silence settled over the room. The overhead lights hummed. You have no authority to pursue a civilian at her level, Collins said. She's a sitting senator, you know what that entails. It means she has clearance, I said. Not immunity, his gaze hardened. This is not your lane, you are a symbol, general, not a political instrument. Symbol, the word felt like an insult and a verdict. With respect, sir, I said evenly, national security doesn't end where politics begins. His palm hit the table, not loud but final. You will not escalate this. That's an order. There it was, the belief that rank could postpone truth. I didn't argue. I held his eyes instead until the silence became too heavy to share. Then I gathered my files and left. Marcus followed without a word. Outside, the Florida sky hung low and gray, thunder grumbling along the horizon. The rain came that night, hard and uneven, drumming against my window in a rhythm that made sleep impossible. I sat at my desk, screen glowing, files unopened. Just after midnight, 3 quiet knocks sounded. I opened the door. No one stood there. Only a padded envelope darkened by rain, my first name inked across it. Not General, not Ma'am, just Adeline. Inside was a small flash drive wrapped in plastic and a note, from someone who still owes you a life. I stared at the letters, the ink blurred where raindrops had hit, then slid the drive into my encrypted terminal. A single unmarked video file appeared, timestamped 2 days prior. Grainy footage filled the screen, shot from a concealed angle in a room I recognized instantly, the private conference room of the Senate Defense Subcommittee. Clara sat at the head of the table, posture composed, voice utterly calm. Across from her, Daniel Creed, her senior advisor, the architect of her media strategy. If the Aurora breach gets out, Creed said, voice low but clear, you'll lose your committee seat, maybe your whole career. Clara didn't blink. Then we do what they do best, she replied. We redirect, let them believe Porter leaked it, she's already an enigma. The silent ones are always easiest to doubt. Creed gave a short laugh. You're playing with fire. Fire is only dangerous, she said, smiling that polished smile, when you forget who's holding the match. The footage ended. I sat motionless as rain traced jagged lines down the glass. Lightning flashed, briefly bleaching the room white. The memory came unbidden, the desert night, the 3 soldiers gone, the report calling it a technical error. And now a senator willing to orchestrate another betrayal, not for survival or ideology, but for optics. This was no longer about reclaiming anything stolen from me. It was about stopping a lie before it rewrote yet another piece of history. I picked up my phone and dialed. Marcus answered on the second ring. Yeah, we're going to internal affairs in the morning, I said. Bring everything on Aurora. He paused. They'll try to shut you down. I've spent most of my life being shut down, I said. It's time I learn to speak when it counts. He didn't argue. After I hung up, the room glowed faintly with the screensaver, the Aurora insignia, a thin white line across black. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the storm move closer, thunder rolling longer, fuller. Clarity rarely arrives quietly, it follows the noise. The Capitol gleamed under spring sun, the Capitol dome too bright against a clear blue sky. Each step down the marble corridor echoed, measured and steady, composure as armor. The hearing room doors sighed open, cameras swiveled in unison, lenses catching every angle of my entrance. The silent general, someone murmured. I walked to the witness stand, medals visible for once. I'd hidden them most of my life. Today they weren't decoration, they were context. The Defense Committee members sat in a curve of polished wood, power raised slightly above accountability. At the center, Clara. Under the studio lights, she was flawless. But her grip on her pen was too tight. Even from a distance, I saw her knuckles whiten. The chairman struck the gavel once. General Porter, do you understand why you've been summoned? I glanced at the packed gallery, press, civilians, staff. Expectation buzzed in the air, a controlled charge. I was called here, I said, because after 25 years of silence, someone finally decided they wanted me to speak. A murmur ran through the room. The chairman gestured to proceed. I placed a flash drive on the podium. The screen behind me flickered to life, showing the hidden camera footage, Clara and Creed, their conversation filling the room. If the Aurora breach leaks, you'll lose your seat, then we redirect to let them think Porter did it. Fire is only dangerous when you forget who's holding the match. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. That's fabricated, Clara burst out, her composure cracking. She illegally accessed Senate. No, I said, cutting through her. What I accessed was the military network you used to channel classified Aurora data to a private contractor, and I have proof. I slid another folder forward. The screen changed, access logs, coordinates, timestamps, one code glowed at the center. Main 12, linked to C. Maynard, the chamber erupted. Reporters buzzed, committee members leaned into each other, words flying in heated whispers. The chairman hammered for order. I waited until the noise ebbed. Then I spoke, slow and controlled. In 2011, I lost 3 soldiers to a similar breach. The report called it a systems failure. It was negligence disguised as bureaucracy. I promised their families that no one else would die because the truth was inconvenient. My throat tightened. I didn't let it affect my tone. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here because when leaders trade integrity for optics, innocent people pay the price. Clara surged to her feet. You're lying, you were always jealous. Jealous, I met her stare. No, Clara. Pity, you never understood that real service doesn't require a camera, just conviction. Her voice faltered. The cameras caught it, the shift from outrage to fear. Whispers swelled along the dais. Flashbulbs strobed from the back of the room. The chairman's voice cut in rough. This committee will recess for review. The gavel came down, final. As I stepped away from the stand, Clara's shoulders sagged. Her pen rolled from her fingers and clattered across the table. The same hands that had clasped mine at 17, promising a shared future, now trembled under exposure. I walked up the aisle as the cameras stuttered and clicked, each one trying to capture the moment. Outside, sunlight washed over me, clean and indifferent. For the first time in years, standing in full light didn't feel like scrutiny, it felt like release. A week later, the vote came. The headlines scrolled under every broadcast. Senator Clara Maynard suspended pending criminal investigation. The noise shifted inward, gnawing on the institution instead of me. Pundits turned from speculating about my motives to dissecting hers. I watched from my office in Washington, my name scrolling past as no longer the silent general, but the woman who refused to disappear. Both labels were wrong, both were only stories. That afternoon, James appeared at the Pentagon unexpectedly, holding a small bouquet of white lilies too formal for us, too fragile for the building. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't, I answered. We've both just finally learned to see people as they are. You're not angry, he asked. Anger is for people who still don't understand themselves. We walked the corridor in silence. The fluorescent hum overhead was familiar, impersonal. I once thought these hallways were where order began, now they just looked like polished history. We paused outside the press room. A television glowed above the door. The president stood at a podium on the White House lawn, voice solemn. In difficult times, he said, we are reminded of those who value integrity above comfort. Today we honor a citizen who stood firm when it would have been easier to yield. My name appeared among the commendations, nomination, Medal of Honor, Lieutenant General Adeline Porter. James glanced at me. You earned that long before today, he said. Maybe, I replied. Sometimes the world has to fall apart before it remembers what's worth rebuilding. The ceremony took place 2 days later on the South Lawn. The air was brisk, sky scrubbed clean. Flags snapped high and sure. Dignitaries filled the chairs, but beyond them what I felt was simpler, quiet. When my name was called, I stepped forward. Sun flared off my medals. We honor a woman, the president said, who served in silence and who stood her ground when the world around her chose comfort over conviction. He placed the medal over my shoulders. The ribbon felt heavier than metal warranted. As I turned toward the audience, my gaze caught on a figure in the last row. Clara, no cameras this time, no makeup, her hands folded, eyes unreadable. For a moment, stripped of titles, she looked like any other woman under the same flag. After the ceremony, when most had drifted away, she approached. Her steps were hesitant, voice small. I was wrong, she said. I thought your silence would erase me. All it did was force me to see what I'd become. I studied her face, and the anger I'd once carried simply wasn't there. Silence doesn't destroy, I said. Empty words do. Her head dropped. She nodded once. For the first time, she spoke without performance. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was cleansing. When she turned and walked away, I didn't watch her go. Some endings don't need witnesses. The metal at my collar caught the last of the sun as I stood there, something loosened inside. For years, I'd believed honor had to be seen. That day, I understood it was about being whole. I looked toward the horizon, flags whipping against the sky, and let out a long breath. The fight was done not because justice had achieved perfection, but because the truth no longer needed to hide. Clara had lost everything. Once I had too, maybe that was the point. Some lessons only arrive when there's nothing left to protect. As I walked down the path from the podium, a pane of glass threw my reflection back at me, the same face, but lighter, no bitterness. No triumph, just a woman who'd paid the cost of truth and survived it. The price was everything I thought I was, it was worth it. A year later, the air in Colorado felt thin and sharp, the kind of clean that has to be earned. From the window of the small lecture hall, I could see Pikes Peak dusted in snow, rising white against a high blue sky. I was General Porter there, just Professor Adeline. 30 cadets filled the seats, uniforms pressed, eyes clear. My class, Leadership in Crisis, an honest title. No one really grasps it until they've lived through something breaking. Midway through the lecture, a cadet with copper-red hair raised her hand. Her voice was careful. "Ma'am, what was the hardest mission you ever had?" I smiled, not at the question but at its pure, unvarnished form. "Coming home," I said. The room went still, 30 young faces waiting, not for detail but for weight. I walked to the front table and set a small object down, a worn silver coin, its edges smoothed by years of being turned between fingers, the ghost talon insignia barely visible. "What we do," I told them, "isn't meant to make us known. It's meant to make the world safer for someone who'll never know our names." When class ended, boots echoed softly as they filed out. The red-haired cadet lingered near the door, then stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said, "you're the reason I applied here." I looked at her, young, eager, carrying a fire I recognized from another life. "Then don't make my mistake," I said. "Don't stay silent when it's time to speak." Outside, the wind cut cold across the academy grounds, but the chill felt like renewal, not punishment. Somewhere beyond the peaks, I heard the faint ghost of rotor blades, distant, fading, not a summons anymore, just an echo. Before leaving, I walked the Hall of Legacy. Bronze plaques lined the walls, those who served, those who fell, those who taught others how to stand. At the end hung a new addition, metal bright against the stone. Adeline Porter, valor in silence beneath it, an inscription. She taught us that truth speaks loudest when carried with honor. I reached out and brushed my fingertips across the cold metal. My reflection stared back, vague in the polished surface, not a warrior, not a myth, just a woman who'd made peace with both. For the first time there was no anger, no weight, no noise. Only stillness. It felt like freedom.